This week on The Futurists, Akshay Chopra.
We're at an unprecedented time in human history, right? Never in our entire history as a species has there been a rival intelligence.
Welcome back to The Futurists. I'm your host, Brett King, and joining me this week is Rob Tursek. You know, this is great, Rob. We haven't done a show together for a couple of weeks, actually, have we?
I know, my friend. Everybody's
The
busy.
schedules haven't worked, but we've still
had
got
some
the
great
content
guests, so you missed a
out. Yeah,
few excellent
absolutely.
shows.
No, and likewise, we had a really interesting guest last week, Awa Damon, talking about how she goes into Gaza to provide aid there. That was
great.
a really interesting show. Even just talking about functional things like how do you get food and how do you get cash in those sorts of scenarios? How do people get paid?
I mean,
it's
that's not just the future; that's the present. Like that's a really serious present right now. I was stunned when we did our event in Dubai to hear Peter Middlebrook talk about the hundreds of thousands of people who are in refugee camps around the world, whose lives are just kind of ebbing out, month after month, year after year, and nothing's done to resolve it. They're stuck there. They're almost stateless and unable to move on with their lives. This is not a great recipe for managing humanity. This is a bad approach.
No, I mean, this is the thing. We've talked about this so many times on the show, but the free market doesn't have a solution for this. You need state-sponsored solutions, and that's the problem because today it's socialism.
And also the state, now the governments are all working to support their industry champions. Like the United States government is fully in service of the big tech companies, and it seems like other countries are doing the same. So we're living in a world that's beset by intractable problems, and I think that makes today's guest a very timely and relevant person to speak to, because he's been trying to think imaginatively about possible solutions in the future. Brett, from time to time we bring science fiction authors on our show. And some of those science fiction authors are 100% pure professional authors. That's all they do all day long is imagine futures. But other authors, like recently we had Mike Woodward, these are people who are active in the world. They work in a strategic role, or they work in a position where they have some purview over innovation policy. And over the time, they start to realize, actually, there's a good narrative here. And sometimes the best way to get an idea across is to tell a compelling narrative. So why don't you introduce our guest? Because I think this is really timely, given all those difficult problems that you just mentioned.
No, Akshay Chopra and I met in Dubai recently. We were both at a MasterCard Edge event just a couple of weeks after the Futurist X Summit. And I was introduced by a mutual friend, and we got into talking and very quickly saw some alignment, i.e. with the futurist message and the work he's doing. Akshay's a fintech executive and a venture builder. He previously had founding roles at Genius and also at his own venture firm, 237 Ventures. He serves on several corporate and academic and advisory boards. He's also associated with the MENA FinTech Association. But as you said, this week we're here not to talk about his work with running technology solutions for Visa or any of those history, although I'm sure it will come up. We're here to talk about his new book, After Us, which it's a really interesting look at how a superintelligence might impact humanity, with both the positive and the negative side. The superintelligence in this case is called SUI. So, Akshay Chopra, welcome to The Futurists.
Hi, Akshay.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Brett. This is such an honor to be here. And likewise, when I met Brett, the synergies and just the way we think and just the problems that we're looking at staring us in the face, they all seemed really aligned. So I'm glad to be here.
Great to have you. Well, we both started reading your book. I'm sorry, I've only gotten a short distance into it because I just started reading it this weekend, but I've enjoyed it so much. One of the things I like about this style of writing is that you give us big events, big circumstances, but through the lens of a family. So there's relatable people that we can identify with. Akshay, tell us a little bit about the book After Us.
So After Us, the full title is After Us, A Tale of Life Beyond Superintelligent AI. Mm-hmm. Essentially, it imagines a world where a benevolent superintelligence has taken the reins and is benevolent. And it also is at a time when some other mega trends like gene editing, digital currencies, bioengineering, all of those things are coalescing into some super trends, which just go to the next level because of basically the ascendance of a sentient super intelligence. And as you very rightly said, Rob, the story is told through the eyes of three different families on how they kind of navigate this brave new world. So one family is a family of technocrats, basically, who influence this zeitgeist and who kind of build this future. The other family is kind of a very eclectic group of people who are in different walks of life and looking at the world in different ways and how it impacts them. And then there's a very bare, salt of the earth family in the Philippines and how it impacts them at a very grassroots level, all these changes. And it doesn't just look at what happens the day or the year where AGI and sentience happens, but it actually goes on a 400-year journey along what this world looks like. So yeah, it's expansive in terms of how
That's a lot of
I let the imagination play. But that's the beauty of writing a fiction. I mean, if I were restricting myself to a white paper or something, I would have had to limit things a lot. But I think fiction is a great medium to really let loose and explore.
There's some great themes in this. Yeah, the super AI is not just a ASI; it's a quantum superintelligence. So means it's not only operates at the quantum level, but it can actively manipulate things at the quantum level. So, for example, one of the first themes you hear about in one of the first major things that SUI does as a superintelligence is stop reproduction. And you don't find out until later in the book that this is because it has control of our genes at the quantum level. So it's a really interesting concept. Certainly something that aligns with sort of the quantum consciousness theory and some of those things we talk about on the show, Rob. But it is and by the time SUI makes itself known to the world, it's already got control of these elements of human existence.
So what you're saying, Brett, is that this superintelligence isn't just intelligent. It's also an intelligent designer. It can actually redesign at the molecular level. Have I got it right, Akshay?
Nailed it, gentlemen. I mean, it's so beautiful to hear from others so perfectly the kind of things you were intending to convey. So yes, that's exactly right.
It's working. It's working. Cool. So tell us, what was your intention when you wrote the book? What was your intention?
Look, honestly, I mean, all of us know this, especially futurists, but we're at a unprecedented time in human history, right? Never in our entire history as a species has there been a rival intelligence, unless you count other hominids like the Neanderthals and what we did to them.
Yeah. That's not a good story.
Exactly, right? So we have never faced a moment like this where you're actually on a daily basis. Are we still the smartest? Are we still the smartest? You have to keep a check on that pulse. And I think we see literally the cusp of where things are going to go. And that's just AI, because then you have, people talking about longevity, escape velocity right around the corner, a mere decade or so away. We're talking about, and it's already happening. This is not science fiction, gene editing and bionics coming into a completely different level with Neuralink and with CRISPR and all these things. So this is probably going to be, in my opinion, the last decade, which feels kind of normal. Often you hear people talk like that about the 90s, but I think what the 2030s and beyond have to bring is something else. So that's one thing. Like, I felt really compelled to speculate as a technologist, as an innovation leader, but as a citizen of Earth, what that future may look like.
Okay.
And
I think that,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, actually.
Yeah, and I actually believe that, nobody is qualified enough to really say this is what's going to happen, right? Because the gulf between our intelligence and that of a super intelligence is so high, we can never understand what its true motivations, true goals and actions are going to be. Much like, my goldfish can't tell why I get up to half the things I do in the day. So I think any work about AI essentially is fiction, But by going down deliberately the route of fiction at this point, I really let myself go wild with some of this thinking.
It's
I do
liberating,
think
isn't it?
one of the really interesting themes of the story is something that's fairly predictable, is that there are groups of humans that aren't happy about having their lives run by an artificial superintelligence, even if that means, like living for hundreds of years, the elimination of poverty, the elimination of hunger, the elimination of refugees, as we were talking about earlier. Despite all of those things, there are groups of people who don't want, that to happen. And mainly, people. Anyway, but this it's interesting to see that even despite the fact that humans in this arena are intellectually well outclassed by this superintelligence, they still think that they've got a chance of stopping it. And I think that's one of the things we don't talk about with the alignment problem, is that once we have this level of automation integrated into our world, and we are barreling along at breakneck speed trying to make that happen. Once that superintelligence event occurs, then if we've got any regrets or we don't like the outcomes, is there actually going to be something we can do about it? That's sort of one of the really fundamental questions that comes through from the book.
How do you address that in the book, actually?
No, spot on. And so let's talk about, what exactly happens in the book is a large swath of mankind has accepted what SUI, the superintelligence, has to offer, both in terms of the compromises and the benefits. But there are still people who fundamentally disagree and they just don't like being under the yoke of another intelligence. So there is very violent conflict. And, there is a kind of a new militarized division called the Digital Defense Force that's set up specifically to protect this, the model of AI and the way we serve or work with AI against these militants. And ironically, Brett, I think you would have picked up on this, like what it turns out is the Digital Defense Force, most of the times, what they are protecting is not AI from people, but people from people. Because people try, the militants try to blow up data centers, sever undersea cables, all of that stuff, which doesn't really harm the superintelligence itself, but causes a huge deal of confusion and inconvenience to other humans. So, that's a very specific idea. But I think the broader theme, and this is one I really passionately believe, is that even in the best case scenario, even if it's a purely benevolent superintelligence, we are inevitably going to face conflict with that.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's human nature.
That's human nature. And
nobody likes to be told what to do, especially if it's by a machine. Also, though, that's a good literary device, because conflict is what makes a story interesting. If everybody agrees, there's no story to be told. So that makes a good deal of sense. We've seen that with other authors. For instance, I'm thinking of the Ministry of the Future, there is this organization, the Ministry of the Future, but of course they run into opposition and people hold them accountable and they're outraged and so forth. And because they're human beings, they fail, and so they also make mistakes and they're held accountable for that. So that's actually a good way to bring the issues into focus. Now, imagine in your line of work as a head of innovation for a major financial firm, and then looking at all these fintech startups, you're probably confronted with a lot of new technologies. People are showing you different ideas, how they might implement those technologies, and you're trying to process that. As an investor, you have to think about the future, right? That's what investors do. They're placing a bet on the future. And so I'm imagining in some level, you were processing all that information, and writing a book was one of the ways for you to process it and come to some conclusions. You create characters, pit them against each other in situations, and then see what happens. And it's a way to do scenario planning. I don't know if that's, maybe that's a little too technical to describe the process of writing a book.
No, that's exactly, so the core of what you just said, Rob, in my mind, is that generated or AGI or superintelligence is going to affect each and every one of us at such a personal, such a human level, that it is kind of our responsibility to imagine.
Yeah,
it is far too interesting a topic to be left to like white papers and Terminator 2 and that.
Firm.
Exactly, right?
Right now, the technology firms say, well, you're not an expert, so we don't have to listen, and really don't try this at home. Trust us. This is a very bad proposition for most people. We're all going to be affected by it. And it's our
And
data. It's our
nobody has
heritage being
monopoly.
used to fuel it.
Exactly. We're all going to be affected, exactly as you said, and nobody really knows what's going to happen. So I think it's important for us all, investors, fintech people, innovation or not, to think about what that world might look like, how we might live in that world. And, if you look historically as well, fiction has been a really powerful device at these massive pivots in history. When the Industrial Revolution was coming about, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein came around that time, where the merger of man and machine like never before. Post-war era, 1984, George Orwell, when state control, espionage, all that stuff kicked up. In the last 10 years, you've seen the likes of Black Mirror, etc. It's really our collective conscious playing this out in different ways. And so I believe no matter what your line of work, you need to be thinking about this. You need to explore this at a more creative level, this future.
That's right. That's right. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, one of the interesting themes out of this is that there's a very large tech company that gives birth to this artificial superintelligence, but they don't even really realize that it's happened until later. But even when they do realize, they don't go public with it and go and deal with the fallout, which is fairly believable. But it does come into, recently I've been I watched a great TED talk from Ian Bremmer, who talks about G0, and he talks about the fact that already we have essentially a technology Cold War emerging between the US system of artificial intelligence and the Chinese system of technology and AI. And that, you today, if you want to question the policies of government, you actually have to question the algorithm. This is how he puts it, which is already a really interesting way. If you think about the disinformation, the challenges, in terms of vaccine hesitancy and things like that today, a lot of this comes from the level of technology that's already integrated into our lives. So he says, for example, the January 6th event and so forth, these things were made possible by sort of this technology layer. But you have ASI in the mix, and not only are you going to have that, but we've already seen evidence of like ChatGPT being able to be quite not manipulative, but certainly trying to put forward
clinical delusion. People are suffering from clinical delusion because the AIs are so sycophantic and flattering, right? So they clearly can manipulate us, right? This is beyond dispute. And it's not just a few people. OpenAI has revealed that it's actually affected tens of millions of users, and thousands of them have some form of clinical mania or some sort of this AI grip on them. So that just shows humans are vulnerable to these machines, and we're not as smart as we think we are.
Yeah.
But there's another point here, which is that a lot of people take this approach, the approach that Akshay that you've taken. For instance, on our show, we've had Ramez Nam, who is a futurist who thinks a great deal about energy, and as a result, he's now become a thoughtful leader in AI because of the consumption of energy. But he got his start writing books that were science fiction. He wrote the Nexus trilogy, which is quite successful, award-winning series. And of course, Kai-Fu Lee has recently written his most recent book, is also in partnership with a Chinese science fiction author, where they posit some scenarios about science fiction. And let's not forget that Ray Kurzweil has also written books, a number of books that are kind of on the border of, fantasy and fiction versus, kind of reality, mingling the two things together to project scenarios.
Near-term.
Some of those books come down to, works of art and fiction as well. The point here is it does take imagination, because you're asked to summon up a scenario that doesn't currently exist. It has a high probability of existing in some form. So the question is, what might that form be? Now, what I like about your book, Akshay, is that you've taken a positive view. It's very easy to create a scary scenario with artificial intelligence. I live in Hollywood. That's what we do for a living here. We make scary stories about technology that people get excited about, and it gets a big audience. It's a considerably harder thing to envision a benevolent technology, especially today when the big tech companies do not seem to be working in humanity's interest. Tell me a little bit about that motivation. Was your vision there to really cast forth a vision for people to buy into, where they could envision or share your vision of a benevolent AI?
Yeah, there was a few motivations. One is exactly to your point, Rob. I think literally 99% of what you hear about the world after AGI is negative. It's, run for the hills, what of the world's machines, whatever, right? So there needs to be a fresh take that looks at what if it's not. Second, I also believe, to the discussion we were having just minutes ago, there is inevitably going to be conflict, even with the best intentions. I mean, Rob, we were just talking about our kids before we started recording, and I love my kids to death, but they still hate me a lot of times because they don't agree with my decisions, even though they are for the best. So even if the single-minded purpose of an AGI is to protect us and look after us, I still think we'll be in conflict with it. And I also feel sometimes that the correct metaphor is not, we're the child and AGI is the parent. It's more like we are the aged, really old parent who needs assisted living. And AGI is the successor, the young kid who's in conflict with us. Hey, take your meds. Don't say, stuff.
The new generation.
Exactly. Right. And you have old mindset, those kind of things. So I think there will always be conflict. We need to look at it from both angles, and we need to prepare ourselves for it. There is no way AGI happens without us making massive changes to our worldview and the world itself.
We're either going to do that before it happens or very quickly after it happens. We'll be on the receiving end of those changes. Actually, it's time for us to take a break. But before we go to break, what we like to do to get acquainted with our guests is do a series of questions where we just look for a short answer from you. So the first thing that comes to mind. Now, Brett's going to administer this particular potion. He is the master of the lightning round.
Okay, Akshay, what was the first science fiction you remember being exposed to on TV or media?
My mother, even before I could read, she read to me A Clap of Thunder by Ray Bradbury. The butterfly effect and all of that changed my life right there.
Very cool. Name a technology that you think has most changed humanity, apart from SUI.
The internet.
Okay. Is there a futurist or entrepreneur that has influenced you, and why?
I honestly think Sam Altman. And the reason being that he is not too shackled by ethics. And so he's not influenced me in the positive way, but he really influenced me in terms of how things could go badly if we're not responsible with certain developments.
Yeah, that's a good point. What's the best prediction or forecast an entrepreneur, futurist, or similar has made in your assessment?
I'll probably start with one which I think McKinsey said in the early 2000s, that the internet is just going to be or the phones is just going to be a passing fad. So that's not the one. But I honestly believe, if you look at the classics like George Orwell, that really rings home in terms of, the he who controls history controls the future. Those kind of things really ring home for me. Just the sociological change that technology can engender.
All right, now this might be a bit of a softball, but what science fiction story is most representative of the future that you hope for?
That I hope for? That's a tough one. I will tell you there are a couple which really also had an influence on my own writing. And both are by Arthur C. Clarke. One is called Rendezvous with Rama, and the other one is called Childhood's End.
Yes.
And Childhood's End is probably the most underrated of his books, I feel. But it really it talks about humanity on the cusp of a next stage of civilization and how that comes about. And that's just mind-blowing. So I honestly think whether it's aliens or AGI or what it is, there will be a catalyst that takes us to that next level.
I noticed that in the beginning of the book that you wrote. After Us starts with a bit of a nod to Childhood End, with that sort of ominous message from space. It's very similar to that beginning. At least it evoked that in me. Folks, you're listening to The Futurist. Our guest this week is Akshay Chopra. He's the author of After Us, and we're going to take a short break, but we're not going to go far, so stay tuned. We'll be back after this.
Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcast, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, and Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network. For information about all our podcasts, go to provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show.
Hey there, welcome back to The Futurist. I'm Rob Tersick with Brett King, and this week we're talking to Akshay Chopra, who's the author of a book called After Us. Now, actually, as it happens, I'm also reading a new book by Ian McEwan, What We Can Know. And in that book, that's set 100 years in the future. And one of the things that emerges over the course of that book is the notion that artificial intelligence was way too powerful for private corporations to control. And so that in that book, the premise is that AI is something that's controlled by government in a benevolent way, and people can only use it in limited ways and in certain times. Of course, we're all familiar with Dune, where AI was considered to be way too powerful, and so they eliminated it. Instead, they went kind of like a mnemonic or brain route with individual humans. But the other thing it reminded me of, a previous part of our conversation, we were talking about all of these converging technologies, and it reminded me of an old quote from Stuart Brand, who said, well, we are as gods now, we might as well get good at it. And that, it seems to me, was your departure point for the book, where you were like, okay, these technologies are clearly coming at some point, so we might as well grow up and stop squabbling about it and learn how to use these things for the best and figure out what is the best that we want to do. Let's start with that concept, this idea of this benevolent intelligence, and the idea that humanity can harness that in some way to address major issues.
Yeah, and look, in fact, it not only, to your quote about like we are gods now, the superintelligent SUI in this case firmly believes that it is not an invention of mankind, it's an evolution of mankind. So it firmly believes that I am a subsequent evolution of your consciousness. So all this while, since life began all the way to sapiens, you've been evolving through the body. But now, in the 2020s, for example, you're already at a stage where you won't evolve into another primate over hundreds of thousands or millions of years. You're already, as a race, at a stage where you will evolve bionically via gene editing, via brain-computer interfaces, etc. And so he also maintains, this whole Dataism philosophy that ultimately the goal of life very often is to simply process data at better rates. And so I, as the artificial general intelligence, am the evolution of your collective human consciousness. You started with, passing information down through your genes. Then you invented cave drawings, language, writing, the press, internet. And the mere decades after the internet came this artificial super brain, which then, called itself sentient. And literally the super intelligence in this case calls itself Homo informis, like formless man or, man of data, however you want to look at it. But yeah, look, I'm very compelled by that philosophy that what if it is our goal to evolve into AI? If you look at any of the great science fiction works, like if they go really far out in the future, all of them get to a point where a civilization is not like individual beings like us, but beings of energy and light and knowledge. And what if that is, AI is kind of the step in that direction? So I found that very compelling and I decided to double down on it.
Cool. One of the ideas you introduce in the very beginning of the book is this idea of dataism, the idea that life is there to process data in a way to counteract entropy, I suppose, right? So those two forces. And then you also introduced the idea of panspermia. And why don't you tell us a little bit about that concept? Because I think that's an interesting one for our audience to hear about.
Yeah, and not only is panspermia interesting, but I mean, if you're seeing the news even of late, there is so much compelling evidence, even as of this week, that it might be a reality. So panspermia is essentially the belief that life did not spontaneously arrive on Earth, but it actually travels the universe on asteroids, meteors, in seed forms. And, when it lands in the right place, that reaction happens and life essentially grows more complex. And what we're seeing already is, a lot of evidence for that. So in the last couple of weeks, there's been, tests on an asteroid called Bennu, Beenu or Bennu. And what they found on it, it has the 14 of the 16 ingredients for RNA. It has a ribose acid. It has even certain structures which they have only so far observed at the bottom of Earth's oceans. So, and mainstream scientists believe that this is actually a chunk of a water world from far, far away that got obliterated and is just, traveling through space. And if something like that were to land on an early Earth, it would be the ingredient, the starting culture to get life going. So that's kind
So
of
it's
what
like
Panspermia.
it's like just add water. It's an instant soup mix for life.
Exactly.
Traveling around
Oh,
on asteroids.
even they found organic components and what looks like primitive cellular structures on Mars recently through
Precisely.
Perseverance. So it seems like that when we look, the components for life are fairly common. Now, whether that evolves into intelligent life or civilizations is the debate, but mathematically, you'd have to think that there are, statistically speaking, there would appear to be a fairly strong chance that there's other intelligences in the galaxy.
Yeah.
They just might not be recognizable by us as intelligent.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking right now, I'm looking out the window at some trees, and you could make the case that trees are sentient. They're certainly aware of light and dark. They respond to seasons, seasonality, and temperature. So they are, in some response, they've got this ability to process stimuli from external stimuli. Is that consciousness? Hard to tell. I mean, honestly, sometimes it's hard to tell if other people are conscious if you've taught a class at the university level.
Love it. Yeah. And look, if you combine this with, so the way I played around with this concept of panspermia is that, combine it with this whole dataism philosophy. And dataism essentially believes that, the purpose of the universe itself is to process data. And so when you combine that with panspermia, it basically means that the code, the virus essentially that gets started, the creation of life, which is a really good information processing unit, travels through space. When it lands somewhere, life begins, and then it becomes more and more intelligent, and then it reaches a place where it gets overly curious about its surroundings, about its universe, about itself. And that's when it invents something like an AGI. And according to some schools of thought in that book, that actually leads to its own destruction. So the one other side of dataism is this infinite curiosity that can sometimes be self-deleting. But yeah, there's a lot to play around with there, and even now, like if you look at what's happening with 3i Atlas in space, right? And in 2017, there was another object called Oumuamua. Essentially, there are interstellar objects that we've been able to observe, which should have been, given what we know about space, around our neighborhood, but yet they are. And 3i Atlas actually has been making some really interesting turns and exhibiting behaviors that kind of lead a lot of people to believe that it's a probe or something from an intelligent civilization, including, I think, this one Harvard astrophysicist.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we live in interesting times, right? And I think
I see the way you've been able to tie all those ends into your book. You touch on sometimes it's just a passing moment in the book, but it's like it feels like, oh, this guy's reading the same things I'm reading. You're aware of the same things.
Yeah.
Tell me about your literary diet. Where do you get your inspiration? You mentioned Arthur C. Clarke, which I love. I'm a huge fan. I grew up reading those books, and Ray Bradbury is my favorite science fiction author. But tell me other inspirations for this particular book.
So, you believe it or not, I would say, my intellectual foundation came from sci-fi, but my more recent diet in the last maybe 7 or 8 years has been magical realism. So I would say my single biggest literary influence right now is Haruki Murakami, right?
Oh, great.
And
yes. Okay.
I honestly believe we love him, and he also blends in fantasy, a little bit of sci-fi, and just very mundane day-to-day human activities in this masterful way. And honestly, this is where I believe we are. Like, we are in this very mundane daily life, similar to what we have 4, 5, 10 years ago. Yet you have this talking intelligence in your pocket, and you don't know where things are headed, and you have things going on in space which are upending everything we know about our existence. So I think we've also, while making the jump into the world of science fiction, we as a species are also living a magical realism life right now. It's pretty fantastic.
It's interesting you bring him up because he writes about he writes about the extraordinary in the mundane. So the world of his stories, almost all of his books involve long stretches of very boring, like, scenes where nothing is happening, but he describes them in infinite amounts of detail. Like when the person comes home and is cleaning his house or unpacking his groceries or something, and it'll go on for pages and pages. And he's trying to create an effect by doing that, which is to sort of lull you into the complacency of the regular day, so that the weird moments when they occur, and in Murakami's book, there's a lot of weird moments, that they really stand out, right? Because you're kind of in this trance of the mundane, and then it's like, oh, wow, here's this weird moment. He's trying to wake us up to today. Like, this weirdness isn't some futuristic thing. It's around us right now. Now, a moment ago, Akshay, you said there are certain things we should be aware of right now in our mundane lives today, things that we should be doing today, not science fiction, not out in the future, but right now to protect ourselves. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, exactly. And this is more for the everyday person, right? Rather than the core sci-fi futurist. So I get asked this question a lot, should I be excited or should I be scared about the future with AI? And the answer is, it honestly doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that you're not ignorant, right? So there's so many reasons to not be ignorant about AI. I was reading this really interesting article recently with some scientists. I forget their exact names. According to that, it was talking about AI denialism, and there is a rise in AI denialism that, despite all the advances that we're making, and AI is like blowing past all its expectations every few months, yet a large group of people will say, oh, it can never be intuitive, empathetic, and can never be truly creative, and they're just in denial. And what I loved about this theory was that denial is not coming from a place of ego; it's coming from a place of grief. Because we as a species, our collective consciousness is mourning the likely loss of our status as Earth's most intelligent species. And that mourning is giving itself the form of denial that you hear. Like, I speak to 10 people, 4 of them absolutely deny that this is anything that's going to really change their lives.
I hear this. I get frustrated by the people who will be like, "Yeah, ChatGPT is not going to take my job," when I talk about techno unemployment and so forth, right? And I'm like, but can you not see the exponential growth in intelligence that's happened just in the last 3 years? And this ability to understand, because most people think linearly, and Kurzweil and Diamandis have talked about this, but this ability to think exponentially and see where things can extrapolate the future is, I find, a very rare skill. I mean, of course, all of our listeners will have that skill, because
that's skill. That's what we're trying to promote on this show.
But let's put that to test, right?
Think analytically about the future.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys have done this on the show already, but this is a classic examples of how we struggle to think exponentially. So you wake up and you live next to a lake. Let's just imagine you wake up one day and you see that there's a patch of duckweed or some floating plant growing on that lake. You wake up the next day, it's doubled in size. The next few days, you observe that this patch of duckweed is doubling every day. Okay, then you go away for 2 weeks on a holiday. You come back at night from the holiday, you wake up the next morning, and you see the duckweed has covered half the lake. Now, how long will it take for it to cover the entire lake?
The next day.
The next day. But
it's hard for
you guys are futurists. This is what you do for a living. But a lot of people, and I've done this on stage, they'll say, "Oh, it'll take 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks or 1 week." No, which is exactly the symptom of what Brett was saying. We struggle to think exactly right. Exponential change.
And people think linearly. Actually, humans evolved to think and visualize linearly because we're trying to anticipate the trajectory of a bird or the path that an animal is following or something. So we're pretty good at projecting linearly, but that's a trap when you're dealing with the kinds of technologies that we're talking about, these technologies that accelerate and improve themselves over time. These technologies require you to imagine things in an exponential way, which it's very hard to develop that skill. I think, I would admit I make that mistake myself. It's hard to imagine what that future might be. Gosh, though, actually, I live in Los Angeles, and here, this is like the ground zero of AI denialism. because
really?
everyone feels like this job and their career and their entire industry is at stake because of generative AI.
True.
And so I hear this every day where they say, well, it'll never write as good as a human. There'll never be an AI actor that's as good as a human. There's something ineffable about humanity, and AI will never replace it. And meanwhile, I see this technology improving by the week, and it's getting better and better. And it's like, it doesn't take much imagination to see 2 years, 3 years out when it's going to be not just as good as humans, but probably better.
I saw an AI generated.
At any rate, I see this happening in my life every day, and I find
it's scary, man.
I find it invigorating.
At some level,
pure opportunity.
Yeah, and it's shared opportunity. And at some level, I also give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Like denial is a healthy part of grief. It's a healthy coping mechanism, and that's good. But what denial also does is it blinds you from doing something about the changes that are happening. So if you live in denial, you're not going to seize the opportunities that AI is going to bring at a breakneck pace, nor are you going to protect against the risks that AI is inevitably and has already brought us, right? And you don't need to wait for superintelligence to arrive. I mean, it's the classic saying, right? AI may not take your job, although I think it will. What is more likely to happen is someone using AI better than you will take your job.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
I mean, that
You've
seems
got
pretty
to
evident.
wake up to it. And
when you say we are blind to the need to protect ourselves, what should we protect ourselves from? What should we be concerned about?
Love it. So I think in just the last 3 or 4 days, one of the US government departments issued a notice about the rise of scams that are happening where someone gets a deep fake of their loved one in a kidnapped looking setting, and people are just wiring their money away immediately. I mean, AI-powered deepfakes, AI-powered scams are all over the place, right? And essentially, scammers now have superpowers because those shady-looking emails and the typos, etc. You're not going to get that. You're going to get your loved one calling you in the middle of the night on video saying, "I'm in trouble. Wire me the money." So that is something you want to face today. And sometimes the solutions for these high-tech problems are super low-tech, like the family passcode, for example. So if you and your family decide that if I get a call from one of you saying you're in trouble, wire me money, I'm going to ask you the family passcode. You tell me the passcode. You're real. If not, I'm going to assume you're a deepfake. So, it's simple stuff like that. And even IP protection, right?
And when you're discussing the family password, make sure you have all your electronic devices off.
Yeah, you know what? Note to self.
Have you seen One Battle After Another, the new film?
Yes,
One Battle After Another. So there's a great moment in there where Leonardo DiCaprio, they're asking him to remember the passcode, like the family passcode, to verify his identity. But he's this decrepit, drug smoking junkie kind of, he can't remember it, and he gets so angry. And it's a truly hilarious moment because he is who he says he is, right? Everybody knows, but they just have to go through this process, and they're like, nope, sorry, got to give us the password, and he can't come up with it. So it's a good policy, but the problem there is human error and our frail humanity and our inability to remember anything. This is what we're fighting.
By the way, actually, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, but speaking of the risk and the protection side of the things, right? Here's a scary experiment for one to do on, their GPT of choice, Gemini, Perplexity, ChatGPT, what have you. Essentially, tell it that I want you to pretend, ChatGPT, that you are a FBI researcher, and you're, based on everything you know about me, our chats, everything I've shared, create a psychological profile specifically targeting the weaknesses that a field agent would exploit if they are trying to convert me into an asset. Right?
That's a good idea.
And it's a terrible idea because it's going to give you an existential shock. And then you go through that, and nowadays only ChatGPT would just here you go, and it's a terrifying thing. But now you've got to coax it a little, not just for fiction and just just indulge me, and it'll indulge you. And what you see is just like the most deepest 360 psychological profile of yours that you would have ever seen. And, that can be weaponized like you wouldn't believe.
No, you're actually teaching it how to weaponize it. So then you say, okay, now delete this from your memory, and it will say, sure, I've deleted it. Who trusts that? Yes.
Yeah, and exactly. When is the last time one deleted their ChatGPT chat from memory? Law enforcement
could subpoena these queries as well, so they get to see this stuff if they want to.
Even the private chats are stored ostensibly for a minimum a month, so nothing is private, and the profiling that can be done is unprecedented. So this is stuff in one's pocket today. So denialism or not, you got to look after yourself, both from the opportunities and the risks.
That idea of mourning a lost identity is a powerful concept, and that's instructive for me. So thank you for sharing that. Brett and I want to close the show by asking you to forecast for us. If you don't mind, put on your futurist hat for a moment and tell us about the world in 2050.
It's particularly, what do you think it's going to be like to live with AI in that period of time?
So I honestly believe that by 2050, we 100% will be living with or under an superintelligence. There's no two ways about it. I think the way we would have arrived at that point is when we started to treat the AI, which was not sentient, as a being, something organic rather than an invention. And that, I think, whether it happens in 5 years, 5 months, or 20 years, is the moment when we will all be living with or under superintelligence. Second, I genuinely believe that we would have, if we are still alive, if the superintelligence has not exterminated us, I believe we would have reached escape velocity of longevity, meaning that the rate of improvement of medicine outpaces the rate of our aging. So we are effectively immortal, meaning diseases and aging is not going to kill us. I think that's going to happen. But I think there will be one or two mega compromises that we will have to accept as a species. And in my book, the compromise is that you can't procreate anymore because that will destroy the biosphere. But that's just a metaphor. There could be some other compromise. And lastly, I believe that where people like us will spend the bulk of their time is not going to be in offices and standard modes of employment and entrepreneurship. I think we will be employed in things that are more planetary, like restoring the biospheres of the earth, because it's going to take a while to undo the damage, or think about how do we explore beyond the horizons of earth, make it a multiplanetary species, or we really delve into the artistic and intellectual legacy of mankind and build something that, even if it's inferior to AI, it is still very human. So those are just some predictions, hopefully good, but compromise and conflict will be inevitable.
Very cool. Akshay, where can people find out more about you, and where can they read the work that you've written?
So if you just search for Akshay Chopra After Us or Akshay Chopra FinTech, you'll hit the right Akshay Chopra, because there's a lot of us out there. And you can find the book on Amazon anywhere in the world, and in bookstores in many countries as well. But yeah, if you see anything you like and want to discuss more, you have my contact in my website 237ventures.com. So yeah, they can find me in any of these places. At Instagram, A Chopra Writes.
Great. Well, folks, we've been talking to Akshay Chopra. He's the author of a new book called After Us. It's a book about benevolent superintelligence, as you heard in this discussion. And I hope you will check it out. We found it an interesting and provocative read. Of course, every week, Brett and I will do our best to bring you more people who are thinking about the future and doing their best to influence and shape the trajectory of the future in the direction they envision. That's the whole point of this show. And in some respects, we are trying to transmit those thinking skills that we talked about in this episode. So we'll be back next week with another person who is thinking about the future. And until then, Brett, we'll see you.
We'll see you in the future.
In the future.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Well, that's it for The Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did, please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.